Everybody, this is our virtual budget meeting. I'm David Cook, City Manager, and our agenda for this evening is to talk about the city's fiscal year 2025 budget. Questions are welcome. I think you'll have a way of either texting, calling, or emailing questions in. Well, let's go ahead and start with the presentation. And I'll tell the audience all these slides are on our website, but we start talking about the budget, describing the city council's strategic priorities. And here they are up on the slide: economic development, community investment, community safety, infrastructure, and responsible growth. From a high-level standpoint of the budget, we use these strategic priorities as a way to also describe what's in the budget. So I'll do it at a high level now, and then we'll get into some of the numbers. The fiscal year 25 budget includes the transition of MedStar to the city of Fort Worth. We have set that target date for July 1, 2025, and the budget includes funding to facilitate that transition. Also in the budget is a year one funding of a new meet and confer contract with the police department. We do meet and confer agreements with police every 4 years. The current agreement runs out at the end of September, so we've been in negotiations with the police department to have a new contract in place for October 1, and the recommended 2025 budget includes year one funding for the meet and confer agreement. We also have enhanced police presence in a number of areas, including the stockyards in Magnolia, and we'll talk about that when we get into the police budget. When we talk about infrastructure, the budget includes increased funding for street maintenance. It also includes continued investment in things we've prioritized over the last number of years, including street lights, pavement markings, sidewalks, and cast iron pipe in the water department. We're also in the process of preparing for the 2026 bond program, so that will be coming in the next few years. On the community investment side, we have a new community center opening in the northwest part of the city. We also have the reopening of Meadowbrook Golf Course during fiscal year 2025. It's currently under renovation. We have the continuation of the neighborhood improvement program, and we'll also have a full year funding for the high impact pilot to reduce homelessness. On the economic development front, the budget includes increased funding for our chambers of commerces that we contract with. That includes the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the Black Chamber of Commerce. We also have continued support for the Economic Development Initiatives Fund. And that last bullet you see on this slide talks about our expansions and partnerships with higher education partners. And that's not just TCU expanding in their new medical school in the hospital district, but that's also, when you think about it, Tarleton down off of Chisholm Trail Parkway. It's Texas A&M and their urban campus downtown next to the law school. And it also includes University of Texas at Arlington and their new West Campus in Fort Worth. On the responsible growth side, we'll continue the investment in our comprehensive plan for 2050. We also have a number of planning initiatives going on in transportation and public works. We call that Moving a Million, and that will continue with the upcoming budget. The budget is built around the council's strategic priorities, and we also get input a number of other ways that can include capital project meetings that we have throughout the city. It could include neighborhood association meetings, different boards and commissions that we work with, as well as we do a biennial community survey with residents to give us feedback on services and the budget. Now we'll get into the numbers on the budget. The recommended budget for the city of Fort Worth is just under $2.8 billion. It's quite a big operation, and we'll talk about how we fund those different parts of the corporation. We have a general fund that we'll talk mostly about because that's where we spend property tax and sales tax, and that's where we talk about most of the services that are on residents' mind: police, fire, parks and recreation, libraries, transportation, public works. But we also have a number of other funds, and we'll talk about special revenue funds, and the large ones there include Crime Control and Prevention District. We'll talk about enterprise funds. Those are separate businesses of the city, including the water department, aviation department. All right, let's jump into the general fund. So on the general fund, this slide shows the revenues, both for, last year, the current year we're in, and the numbers for next year, fiscal year 2025. What I'll highlight here is the largest revenue streams are property tax and sales tax, and they make up about 82% of the revenue stream in the general fund. Just shown a different way, when you look at property tax, sales tax, again, 82% of all revenues. Now, when we talk about the property tax revenue that comes into the city, it's a function of two parts of a formula. One is taxable assessed value, and the other part is the property tax rate. So we're going to talk about both the taxable assessed values and the recommended property tax rate. This shows the change in net taxable values for the city of Fort Worth. That top line where it says fiscal year 2024, that's the value of all property in the city of Fort Worth in the current fiscal year. That's just a little bit over $115.7 billion. To remind the audience, we work with 4 appraisal districts, Tarrant County clearly being the largest one, but we also have property in Denton County, Wise County, and Parker County. So those are our 4 counties that we get numbers from to talk about taxable values for the city of Fort Worth. The second number on that slide of just a little over $2.6 billion is the change in value of all property in Fort Worth from one year to the next. So of all the property that was taxed in fiscal year 2024, the current year, that was the increase in value year over year throughout the city of Fort Worth. That number went up 2.25%. I will share 2 observations. One observation is that's the lowest, one of the lowest increases in the last number of years. So the lowest amount of growth in a number of years. It was also a number that was dramatically different than numbers we got from the appraisal districts back in April, May, and June. So that number has been reduced dramatically, one, in the last couple of months, but also reflecting slower growth over the last number of years. The next number on that slide of just a little over $3.5 billion is new construction that occurred in the last year. That's a pretty strong number and consistent with what we've seen over the last couple of years. In total, the net taxable value for fiscal year 2025 and the number that we use to make all the property tax revenue projections is just a little under $122 billion. This slide just shows some of those numbers over the last few years. The red line is total assessed value. The black line in the middle reflects the net taxable assessed value, and then the bottom line is property tax revenue. So the City Council has decided to keep the property tax rate the same that it is in the current year. The current tax rate is 67.25 cents, And the tax rate that we're using to make all the property tax revenue projections is that same tax rate. So there is no change in the property tax rate. We are recommending changing how we allocate the tax rate, however, and we break the tax rate allocation down into a couple different categories. The overall tax rate is 67.25. We break that down into O&M and INS, and the INS really relates to the debt service amount for the city's budget. The debt service amount at 14.75 cents is the same that it is in the current fiscal year. So there is no change in the debt portion of the property tax rate from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 2025. We are recommending how we allocate the O&M part of the tax rate. And we break that up into operations and capital maintenance. The capital maintenance part of that tax rate is going up 1/4 cent. The current rate is 7 cents. We're recommending that that goes up to 7.25, and the operations side will be being reduced by 1/4 cent. That allows the amount of money for capital maintenance to be increased, and that entire increase is going to street maintenance. So there's a big push in the recommended budget to increase the amount of the property tax rate going to street maintenance. So I mentioned the net taxable value of just under $122 billion. We keep the tax rate the same, and then you see the total property tax revenue that's allocated to the different parts of the budget on the last number. This slide shows the expenditures in the general fund in descending order of size of budget. So the police departments, on top there, fire department being number 2, transportation, public works, and it shows the numbers for fiscal year 24 and the year-over-year change for fiscal year 25. The major drivers of the increase in the general fund budget, the general fund budget is going up a little over $40 million. The big part there is for the meet and confer contract with police. The $7.5 million growth in PAYGO is the increase amount of money for street maintenance in the capital maintenance portion of that the tax rate. Then we have pay for performance for employees, fire collective bargaining agreement, the $3.5 million for the transition of MedStar to the city. And then we have some police officer positions that were partially funded in the current fiscal year, and this is the additional funding for a full year funding. Expenditures shown just a little differently in a pie chart. Again, police and fire making up more than 50% of the spending in the general fund. So let's talk about the highlights in the general fund, what the budget achieves. We'll start with police, and in this slide we're showing not just the general fund additions in the budget, but what is also going to be funded out of the Crime Control and Prevention District. So as you see on this slide, there's more officers being funded out of the general fund, including a sergeant for the SWAT team and a crime analyst, and coming out of the Crime Control and Prevention District, more school resource officers, 2 neighborhood police officers in the North Division, and then dedicated bike patrols for Stockyards and the Magnolia District. The fire department highlights include the transition of MedStar to the city. Again, that date is July 1 of 2025. We also have a gear replacement program for firefighters. Transportation Public Works, I mentioned the increase in the tax rate for street maintenance. We'll talk a minute about the high priority capital flood mitigation improvement projects that'll be part of stormwater. On the Parks and Recreation highlights, I mentioned earlier the Northwest Community Center. That's a new community center coming online, and the reopening of the Meadowbrook Golf Course. We also continued the sustained mowing and litter removal funding that we had in the current year budget. That'll continue into fiscal year 25. On the neighborhood services highlights, we continued the neighborhood improvement program, and we also continued the priority home repair program for homeowners. And there's also additional grant funded positions on the neighborhood services side. For code compliance, code also includes our animal shelters. There's additional positions for animal shelter communications. And we also have continued support for the boarding home enforcement program and homeless camp outreach programs. There were additional funds in the current year, fiscal year 24. Those are continued into next year. And then on the other highlights for the general fund, we started a pilot program to reduce homelessness. We call it the High Impact Pilot Program. That continues into fiscal year 2025. We're also going to continue to focus on our Good Nature Green Space Initiative and the other items we show on this slide. For the taxpayer, we've taken the average increase for a home in Tarrant County. So we've made that Tarrant County specific. So the value goes up. The amount for the homestead exemption also increases since it's a percentage. And we show the impact for the average homeowner from 24 to 25. Now we're going to shift from the general fund and talk about some of our enterprise funds. And our enterprise funds operate on their own, we'll call it own business model. We'll talk about our water and wastewater fund, our water department, which is a regional water and wastewater utility that we serve not only the city of Fort Worth, but we serve another 30-some municipalities in our region. The recommended budget does include increases in water and sewer rates, water rates going up 3.3%, and wastewater going up 2.3%. Solid waste, this is the fund. People pay a residential collection fee. It covers picking up all the garbage, recycling, bulky items. There is no increase in the residential fee for garbage or solid waste. We are, however, recommending increases at the landfill. And on that last bullet you see on this slide, we are recommending the elimination of the 32-gallon residential cart. That's the smallest of the 3 carts. If you have a 32-gallon residential garbage cart, you're welcome to keep it, but we're going to discontinue it for new accounts. And we have a stormwater utility. The budget includes a recommended increase on 5% for our stormwater utility fee, and that increase will go primarily to fund storm drain pipe rehabilitation projects. Now moving to special revenue funds, we'll talk about CCPD, which is the Crime Control and Prevention District, which is a half-cent sales tax. And we'll touch on culture and tourism and environmental protection. First, Crime Control and Prevention District. Again, a half-cent sales tax for crime control and prevention. I mentioned some of the items that CCPD will fund, including school resource officers, the additional staffing for bike patrols in the Stockyards and Magnolia districts, additional neighborhood police officers for the North Division. And EMS, when it moves to the city, will become a special revenue fund. And the budget includes, as I mentioned, $3.5 million for that transition to the city. On the environmental protection side, we increased this fund a couple years ago. It's about making sure that the city is cleaner. And part of that was buying a bunch of street sweepers. So we have 12 new street sweepers in the fleet. We hope people see a lot from those street sweepers in the next few weeks and throughout the year. So the total operating budget, again, is just a little bit under $2.8 billion. And I'll say a couple comments about the capital plan. At the same time we talk about an annual operating budget, we talk about a rolling 5-year capital improvement plan. I'll show the numbers in just a second, but it's a continuation of bond programs that we've had in the past, including the 2018 bond program, the 2022 bond program. We are now in the planning process for the 2026 bond program. And it again shows or reflects increased funding for street maintenance. So this is what our capital plans look like over the next 5 years. And you'll see water, general, public events, which is the convention center in the Wool Rogers complex. We have 3 general aviation airports that we are responsible for. We have a stormwater utility, and then we have the Environmental Services Fund. And as you can see from this slide, over the next 5 years, that's nearly $4 billion in capital projects over that period of time. And clearly, the water department leading the way with a little over $2 billion in capital projects over that period of time. This slide shows how we distribute the 7.25 cents of that capital maintenance. We also call it or refer to it as pay-as-you-go. It is cash. And the amount of money that we use to maintain capital infrastructure in the general fund. The largest amount goes to transportation and public works for, again, street maintenance as well as other transportation maintenance. And you see that entire increase from the 1/4 cent increase goes to street maintenance. So if you put the operating budget and the capital budget together, on the left side of this slide is for the current fiscal year. And on the right side are the recommended 2025 budget. So the total budget, including operating and capital, is just a little over $3.6 billion. Again, we build it around the City Council's strategic priorities. And here's where we are in the budget process. So we are doing a number of these budget meetings throughout the city. We are scheduled to have a public hearing on the budget on September 10th. We have a public hearing on the tax rate on September 17th, and the adoption of the budget, tax rate, and all the other things that we need to do as part of the budget scheduled for September 17th. And between now and September 17th, we still have a number of meetings in the community. This is our virtual meeting tonight, and then we have a number over the next week and a half to finish out the budget process. And with that, that concludes my presentation. We'll be glad to answer any questions that have come through.
Our first question is, why are we taking on MedStar?
Why are we taking on MedStar? I think, well, we can get Mark to answer this too, but the quick answer is I think we've looked at EMS systems throughout the United States. They're all struggling financially, and MedStar is in the same situation. We think we can bring them into the city, improve service levels, and put them on a path of financial sustainability.
All right, our next question. If we have a shortfall in taxes, what programs will we cut?
Well, if we end up with a shortfall in taxes, and that has happened before, it happened during COVID, that we will employ a number of different strategies along the way. It won't go immediately to cutting programs and services. We'll first look at, do we need to put into place a hiring freeze? And what we'll try to assess is whether this slowdown in revenue is a temporary situation or a long-term financial impact. That, if we determine it's a long-term financial impact, then we would go look at how we would prioritize services for reduction or elimination.
What is the large increase in the public events budget?
Good question. The large increase, I think it's in the second fiscal year of about $500 million, is the Phase 2 expansion of the convention center. The convention center is currently undergoing Phase 1 of the expansion. The Phase 1 includes the straightening of Commerce Street, and Phase 2 is the bulk of the expansion of the convention center.
Okay, this next question has 3 parts, and it's about the services we provide to the homeless population. Some of it's asking for specific figures, so we might have to get back to the person who submitted it. But here are the questions. How much are you spending to house, feed, and provide services for the homeless? How much is spent on the permanent housing and temporary housing? And what exactly is the high-impact homeless housing, and how much is being spent on that?
So I think the quickest answer is to say we'll have to get back on some of those specific numbers, because we are spending money each year on homeless services. We have spent money for permanent supportive housing. That's a capital expense, but we'd have to pull those numbers together of what we spent over the last number of years. And I'll say there we've had additional funding from the federal government, so that's enhanced our spending on permanent supportive housing. And what is the high impact pilot annual cost there? Do you remember? It's $1.2 million, and so that program is working with MHMR, with the county, with some other social service agencies, and it is directing services at specific individuals to get individual homeless folks services and/or housing in order to put them on a path of success.
And we have the contact information, so we'll get those other figures to you, whoever asked that question. Our next question, when do we expect to meet the needs of the city by being fully staffed, with neighborhood services being a priority?
Well, I'll answer it this way. So we have a number of vacancies in the city. We've added a number of positions over the last 2 fiscal years. And so our ability to fill positions is the pace that departments are able to meet. And so it's up to the departments, again, to meet whatever schedule is to fill those positions. There is no hiring freeze. There is no hiring slowdown going on in the city. If departments have vacancies, they have the ability to fill them. We are currently looking at vacant positions, though, for some reductions, and if positions have been vacant a long time, we are evaluating some of those for either elimination or change.
This next question, I think, might have already been answered, but are the dramatic differences in year-to-year projected capital improvement also about the convention center, or does it include other stuff?
So I think if you looked at that capital slide, you'll notice big differences in what's called public events, and that would be the convention center. And you'll see big differences on the water from year to year. And I think those have to do with large capital projects that include Marys Creek Water Reclamation Facility. And it would also include an expansion of the Eagle Mountain Water Plant. So there are some large capital projects, both on the water side and on the public events side.
Is the Fort Worth Police Department and the Fire Department both fully staffed and funded?
So they're fully funded, but they're not fully staffed. They both have a plan to be fully staffed at a point of time in the future, and I'll have to get those specifics. But the police department has a plan to be fully staffed, and they're going to hold the number of classes that would be able to bring that to fruition, and the same is true for the fire department. They have a number of vacancies, again, but they will be holding classes to fill those vacancies and be fully staffed at some point in time in the future. And we can get those specific dates.
And we don't have any other questions.
That's good. Well, thanks to the audience out there. We have that, I'll bring that meeting schedule back up. We have these other meetings over the next number of days, and if you want to attend one of those, you're welcome to do so. Thank you for your attention.